Imagine 12 brothers whose descendants would shape the course of human history, a family torn apart by jealousy and betrayal, enslaved in a foreign land, forged into a mighty nation through fire and wilderness. They conquered kingdoms, built temples, crowned kings, and split into rival nations. 10 tribes vanished into the mists of history, called lost forever. Yet their story didn't end there. From the dust of ancient Canaan to the gates of the New Jerusalem, these 12 tribes carry a mystery that spans 4,000 years. Who were they? What happened to them? And why does their legacy still matter today? This is the complete story of the 12 tribes of Israel, God's chosen people, and the most fascinating family saga ever told. The story of the 12 tribes begins not with a perfect family, but with one man caught in a web of love, deception, and competing desires. Jacob arrived in Haran, running from his brother Esau's anger, and there he met Rachel at a well. She was beautiful, and Jacob fell in love instantly. He agreed to work 7 years for her father Laban to earn the right to marry her. But Laban was a deceiver, much like Jacob himself had been. On the wedding night, as recorded in Genesis 29:23-25, Laban switched his daughters. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban's excuse was simple. The older daughter must marry first according to their custom. Jacob found himself married to Leah, a woman he never chose. But his love for Rachel burned so strong that he agreed to work another 7 years for her. Genesis 29:28-30 tells us that after completing Leah's bridal week, Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Now Jacob had 2 wives, but his heart belonged to only one. This created a painful rivalry. Leah knew she was unloved, while Rachel knew she was loved but faced a different torment. She couldn't have children. Genesis 29:31 explains, "When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless." The competition between the sisters grew fierce. When Rachel's desperation reached its peak, she did what Sarah had done generations before. She gave her servant to her husband. Genesis 33:4 records Rachel's words, "Here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Not to be outdone, even though Leah had already borne children, she stopped conceiving for a time. So she made the same move. Genesis 39 states, "When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife." This was how Jacob, one man fleeing from family conflict, became the husband of 4 women. 2 wives and 2 concubines, all living together, all competing for his attention and affection. From this complicated household, marked by jealousy and pain, would come the 12 sons who would father the 12 tribes of Israel. God was building a nation from a broken family, proving that his purposes don't require perfect circumstances. Every birth in Jacob's household was a battleground, and every name told a story. The firstborn came to Leah, the unloved wife. She named him Reuben, and Genesis 29:32 reveals her hope. It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. The name Reuben means see a son. Leah's cry that perhaps now Jacob would see her worth. But Jacob's heart didn't change. Leah conceived again and bore Simeon. Genesis 29:33 captures her continued pain. Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. Simeon means one who hears. Then came Levi, whose name means attached, and Leah said in Genesis 29:34, Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. With her 4th son, something shifted in Leah. She stopped looking to Jacob and turned her praise to God. She named him Judah, which means praise, saying in Genesis 29:35, This time I will praise the Lord. Meanwhile, Rachel's arms remained empty. Her anguish grew unbearable. After giving Bilhah to Jacob, the servant bore a son. Genesis 36 records Rachel's triumph. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan, which means he has vindicated. Bilhah conceived again and bore a 2nd son. Genesis 37:8 tells us Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a 2nd son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali, meaning my struggle. When Leah's servant Zilpah bore a son, Leah declared victory as well. Genesis 30:11 says, Then Leah said, What good fortune! So she named him Gad, which means good fortune. Zilpah bore another son, and Leah named him Asher, meaning happy, saying in Genesis 30:13, How happy I am! The women will call me happy. Leah herself began bearing children again. She had a 5th son and named him Issachar, which means reward, because as Genesis 30:18 explains, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband. Then came her 6th son, Zebulun, meaning honor. Genesis 30:20 records her words, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have borne him 6 sons. Finally, God remembered Rachel. Genesis 30:22-24 brings the moment she had waited years for. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, May the Lord add to me another son. Joseph means, may he add. Years later, Rachel would have that 2nd son, but it would cost her life. On the road near Bethlehem, as recorded in Genesis 35:16-18, she went into hard labor. As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni, which means son of my trouble. But Jacob refused to let his beloved son carry such a painful name. His father, however, named him Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. These were the 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Each name carried the weight of family drama, yet each would become the father of a tribe in Israel. Of all his sons, Jacob loved Joseph most. He was Rachel's firstborn, the son of his beloved wife. Genesis 37:3 makes this favoritism clear. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. That special coat became a symbol of everything his brothers resented. Joseph made things worse by sharing his dreams. Genesis 37, 5-7 records, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers understood exactly what he meant, that they would one day bow to him. The hatred grew until it exploded into violence. When Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers in the fields, they saw him coming from a distance. Genesis 37, 18, 20 reveals their plot, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him." Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Reuben, the oldest, tried to save him by suggesting they throw Joseph into a pit instead, planning to rescue him later. They stripped Joseph of his hated coat and threw him into an empty cistern. But while Reuben was away, the other brothers saw an opportunity. Genesis 37, 26-28 describes what happened. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" "Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. They killed a goat, dipped Joseph's coat in its blood, and brought it to their father. Jacob's grief was absolute. Genesis 37, 34-35 tells us, "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. 'No,' he said, 'I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave.' So his father wept for him." In Egypt, Joseph faced slavery and false accusations, landing in prison, but God was with him. He rose to become Pharaoh's right hand, in charge of storing grain during 7 years of plenty. Then came 7 years of famine, just as Joseph had predicted through Pharaoh's dreams. The famine reached Canaan, where Jacob and his sons were starving. Genesis 42, 1-2 shows the desperate situation. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt." "Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." The brothers went to Egypt, not knowing they would bow before the brother they had sold. Joseph recognized them immediately, but they didn't recognize him. Through a series of tests, Joseph finally revealed himself. Genesis 45:4-5 captures the moment. "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt.' And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph invited the entire family to Egypt. Genesis 45, 9-11 records his urgent message. "Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come." Jacob could hardly believe it, but when he saw the carts Joseph sent, his spirit revived. Genesis 46:5-7 describes the journey. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. The betrayal that began with jealousy and hatred became the path to survival. The family was together again, now living in Egypt. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years, but when he felt death approaching, he called his sons together. These weren't just the words of a dying father. They were prophecies that would shape each tribe's future. Genesis 49:1-2 sets the scene. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather around, so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel." He started with Reuben, the firstborn who should have had the greatest honor. But Reuben had slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, a sin Jacob never forgot. Genesis 49:3-4 pronounces judgment. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, turbulent as the waters. You will no longer excel. For you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." Simeon and Levi were addressed together because they shared a violent past. They had massacred the men of Shechem in revenge for their sister Dinah. Genesis 49:5-7 declares, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel." Then came Judah, and here Jacob's tone changed. Genesis 49:8-10 contains one of the most important prophecies in Scripture. "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him." The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Judah would produce kings, including the ultimate king. Zebulun's blessing was brief but significant. Genesis 49:13 says, "Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. His border will extend toward Sidon." Issachar received an unusual prophecy. Genesis 49:14-15 describes, "Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor." Dan's prophecy was complex. Genesis 49:16-17 states, "Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel." Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. Gad's future would be marked by conflict. Genesis 49:19 says simply, Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. Asher received a blessing of abundance. Genesis 49:20 declares, Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali was compared to a deer. Genesis 49:21 says, Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph, Jacob's beloved son, received the longest and richest blessing. Genesis 49:22-26 pours out blessing. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility. But his bow remained steady, his strong arms stayed limber, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God, who helps you, because of the Almighty, who blesses you with blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Finally, Benjamin, Rachel's last son. Genesis 49:27 describes him. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. Each son received words that would define his descendants for centuries to come. When Jacob's family first arrived in Egypt, they were a small group. Genesis 46:26-27 gives us the exact count. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all. 70 people. That's how it started. One extended family settling in the land of Goshen, the fertile region Pharaoh gave them. Joseph was powerful, second only to Pharaoh himself, and his family was protected and honored. They had everything they needed, good land, safety, and freedom to grow, and grow they did. Exodus 1:6-7 describes what happened over the following generations. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Notice the language. Exceedingly fruitful, multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, became so numerous. The text piles up words to show just how explosive this growth was. It wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. This was the fulfillment of God's ancient promise to Abraham, repeated to Isaac and Jacob, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. In just a few generations, 70 people became hundreds of thousands. They filled the land of Goshen. They remained distinct, keeping their identity, their language, their ways. They didn't scatter and assimilate into Egyptian culture. Instead, they stayed together as the children of Israel, maintaining their tribal identities even in a foreign land. But this extraordinary growth created a problem. A new king came to power in Egypt, and Exodus 1:8-10 reveals his concern. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them. or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." This Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph. He didn't care that Joseph had saved Egypt from famine. All he saw was a massive population of foreigners living in his land, growing at an alarming rate. They outnumbered the Egyptians in their own region. What if they rebelled? What if they sided with Egypt's enemies? So Pharaoh made a decision. He would deal with them shrewdly, which meant brutally. Exodus 1:11-14 describes the oppression that began. "So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly." They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The blessing of multiplication became the cause of their suffering. From honored guests to slaves, from freedom to forced labor, from prosperity to bitter oppression. Yet even in slavery they continued to multiply. The harder Pharaoh tried to crush them, the more they grew. The promise to Abraham couldn't be stopped by human cruelty. The slavery intensified until Pharaoh took even more drastic measures. When forced labor didn't stop their growth, he targeted their children. Exodus 1:15-16 reveals his horrifying command. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live." But the midwives feared God more than Pharaoh. Exodus 1:17 says, "The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live." When Pharaoh questioned them, they cleverly explained that Hebrew women gave birth too quickly for them to arrive in time. So Pharaoh gave an even more public order. Exodus 1:22 states, "Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." This was genocide. An entire generation of boys was to be drowned. The oppression had reached its darkest point. The 12 tribes of Israel, descended from those 70 souls who came to Egypt in peace, were now a nation of slaves, watching their baby boys being thrown into the river. It was during this horror that Moses would be born, hidden, and eventually placed in a basket on that same Nile. But that's a story for the next chapter of Israel's journey. Before we leave this period, we must address one crucial change in tribal structure that happened back when Jacob first came to Egypt. Joseph had 2 sons born to him before the famine, sons born in Egypt to an Egyptian mother. Their names were Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was old and sick, Joseph brought his 2 sons to receive his grandfather's blessing. But Jacob did something unexpected. Genesis 48:5 records his declaration, "Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." Jacob adopted them. He elevated Joseph's sons to the same status as his own sons. This meant that Joseph's line would receive a double portion, 2 tribes instead of 1. Genesis 48:15-16 shows Jacob blessing them. Then he blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth." But when Jacob placed his hands on their heads, he crossed them, putting his right hand on the younger Ephraim and his left on the older Manasseh. Joseph tried to correct him, thinking his father was confused. Genesis 48:18-19 describes the moment. So Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." This created a significant shift. The 12 tribes would no longer include Joseph as a single tribe. Instead, his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, would each head their own tribe. The tribe of Levi would eventually be set apart for priestly service and wouldn't receive a territorial inheritance like the others. This kept the number at 12 tribes when it came to dividing the land. So the tribal structure was set. 12 sons became 13 tribes, but the number 12 was maintained through Levi's special role. As the people suffered in Egypt, these tribal identities remained intact, passed down from father to son. They were slaves, but they remembered who they were. The children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob divided into tribes, waiting for deliverance. God heard the crying of his people. After 400 years in Egypt, the last decades spent in brutal slavery, the time for deliverance had come. Moses stood before Pharaoh with a simple message from God. Exodus 5:1 records his demand. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, 'Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.'" Pharaoh refused. He didn't know this God of the Hebrews, and he wasn't about to lose his workforce. So God sent 10 plagues, each one striking at the heart of Egypt's gods and power. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs covered the land. Gnats, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, locusts, and darkness followed. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. The final plague was different. God would strike down every firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's son to the firstborn of cattle. But the Israelites would be protected through the blood of a lamb. Exodus 12:21-23 explains what Moses told the elders, "Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb." Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in the basin, and put some of the blood on the top and on both sides of the doorframe. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. That night, death swept through Egypt. Every house without the blood on the doorframe lost its firstborn. The wailing was unbearable. Exodus 12:29-30 describes the devastation. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh broke. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and gave the order. Exodus 12:31-32 captures his desperate command. Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also, bless me. The Egyptians urged them to hurry, even giving them silver, gold, and clothing, just to speed their departure. The 12 tribes of Israel left Egypt that night, not as scattered slaves, but as an organized people. Exodus 12:37-38 gives us the picture. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. 600,000 men, plus women and children, over 2 million people walking out of slavery together. The tribes moved as one massive group, carrying their possessions, driving their animals, holding their children. They followed Moses, who followed the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that God provided to guide them. But Pharaoh changed his mind. When he realized what he had done, released his entire workforce, he gathered his army and chased after them. The Israelites found themselves trapped between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. Terror gripped them, but Moses spoke God's promise. Exodus 14:13-14 records his words. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then God moved. Exodus 14:21-22 describes the miracle. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. All 12 tribes walked through on dry ground. When the Egyptians followed, the walls of water collapsed, drowning Pharaoh's entire army. The people who had been slaves in the morning were free by evening, standing on the far shore watching their oppressors sink beneath the waves. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the tribes arrived at Mount Sinai. This wasn't just a stop on their journey. This was where God would transform them from a freed group of slaves into an organized nation. Here at this mountain, God would give them laws, build them a worship center, and structure them into a proper army. The organization was precise and intentional. God didn't want chaos. He wanted order. The 12 tribes were arranged in a specific pattern around the tabernacle, which sat in the center of the camp. Numbers 2:12 introduces the structure. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "The Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting some distance from it, each of them under their standard and holding the banners of their family." Each tribe had its own banner, its own identity, but they were positioned strategically. 3 tribes camped on the east side, 3 on the south, 3 on the west, and 3 on the north. The arrangement wasn't random, it was military. On the east side, facing the sunrise and the entrance to the tabernacle, were the leading tribes. Numbers 2.3 to 9 list them. Judah with 74,600 men, Issachar with 54,400 men, and Zebulun with 57,400 men. These 3 tribes together formed a division of 186,400 fighting men under Judah's leadership. They would march first when the camp moved. The south side held Reuben's division. Numbers 2.10-16 places Reuben with 40,500 men, Simeon with 59,300 men, and Gad with 45,650 men, a total of 151,450 warriors. They would march second. The west side belonged to Ephraim's division. Numbers 2:18-24 assigns Ephraim with 4,500 men, Manasseh with 32,200 men, and Benjamin with 35,400 men, totaling 108,100 soldiers. They marched third. The north side was Dan's division. Numbers 2:25-31 lists Dan with 62,700 men, Asher with 41,500 men, and Naphtali with 53,400 men, a combined force of 157,600 men. They formed the rear guard, marching last. In the very center of this massive camp stood the tabernacle, surrounded by the tribe of Levi. The Levites didn't camp with the other tribes. They formed a protective ring around God's dwelling place. Numbers 152-53 explains their unique position. The Israelites are to set up their tents by divisions, each of them in their own camp under their own standard. The Levites, however, are to set up their tents around the tabernacle of the covenant law, so that my wrath will not fall on the Israelite community. The Levites are to be responsible for the care of the tabernacle of the covenant law. When the camp moved, there was a specific order. The pillar of cloud would lift, and Judah's division would break camp first, leading the march. Then came Reuben's division. The Levites would dismantle the tabernacle and carry it in the middle of the procession. After them came Ephraim's division, and finally Dan's division brought up the rear. Numbers 2:34 summarizes, "So the Israelites did everything the Lord commanded Moses. That is the way they encamped under their standards, and that is the way they set out, each of them with their clan and family." This wasn't just about organization. It was about identity. Each tribe knew exactly where they belonged, who they marched with, and what their role was. They weren't a mob of refugees anymore. They were a nation with structure, order, and purpose. Among all the tribes, Levi stood apart. They weren't counted with the others. They didn't camp with the others, and they wouldn't receive land with the others. God had chosen them for something different, to serve him directly. The consecration of the Levites happened at Sinai. God spoke to Moses about them, and Numbers 3:11-13 reveals the reason for their selection. The Lord also said to Moses, "I have taken the Levites from among the Israelites in place of the first male offspring of every Israelite woman. The Levites are mine, for all the firstborn are mine. When I struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, I set apart for myself every firstborn in Israel, whether human or animal. They are to be mine. I am the Lord." Remember the night of the Passover. God had claimed every firstborn in Israel as his own because he spared them when he struck Egypt. Now, instead of taking the firstborn from every tribe, he took the entire tribe of Levi as his special possession. They would serve in place of all the firstborn. The Levites were divided into 3 family groups, each with specific duties. Numbers 3:17 names them. These were the names of the sons of Levi: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Each son's descendants had their own responsibilities. The Gershonites camped on the west side of the tabernacle. Numbers 3:25-26 lists their duties. At the tent of meeting, the Gershonites were responsible for the care of the tabernacle and tent, its coverings, the curtain at the entrance to the tent of meeting, the curtains of the courtyard, the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard, surrounding the tabernacle and altar, and the ropes, and everything related to their use. The Kohathites camped on the south side. They had the most sacred responsibility. Numbers 3:31 describes it. They were responsible for the care of the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the articles of the sanctuary used in ministering, the curtain, and everything related to their use. These were the holy objects inside the tabernacle itself. The Merarites camped on the north side. Numbers 3:36-37 assigns them. The Merarites were appointed to take care of the frames of the tabernacle, its crossbars, posts, bases, all its equipment, and everything related to their use, as well as the posts of the surrounding courtyard with their bases, tent pegs, and ropes. But within the tribe of Levi, one family was even more set apart, the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother. They were the priests. Numbers 3:10 establishes their exclusive role. Appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary is to be put to death. Only Aaron's sons could offer sacrifices, enter the holy place, and perform the priestly duties. The rest of the Levites assisted them, but they couldn't do the priest's work. It was a sacred division within an already sacred tribe. Because of their special service, the Levites received no territorial inheritance. Numbers 18:20 makes this clear when God speaks to Aaron. The Lord said to Aaron, "You will have no inheritance in their land, nor will you have any share among them. I am your share and your inheritance among the Israelites." Instead of land, they would receive the tithes from the other tribes. Numbers 18:21 explains, "I give to the Levites all the tithes in Israel as their inheritance in return for the work they do while serving at the tent of meeting." The Levites would eventually be given cities to live in throughout Israel's territory, but no tribal land of their own. Their inheritance was the Lord himself, and their work was his service. This created an interesting situation. There were actually 13 tribes now, with Ephraim and Manasseh counting as 2. But when it came to dividing the land, there would still be 12 portions, because Levi wouldn't receive one. The journey from Egypt to Canaan should have taken weeks. Instead, it took 40 years. The reason was simple: rebellion. From Sinai, the tribes moved north toward the Promised Land. When they reached Kadesh Barnea at the edge of Canaan, Moses sent 12 spies, one leader from each tribe, to scout the land. Numbers 13:1-2 records God's instruction. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders." The spies went in and explored for 40 days. When they returned, they brought back evidence of the land's incredible fruitfulness, including a cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it. But 10 of the 12 spies brought a terrifying report. Numbers 13:31-33 captures their fear. But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Only 2 spies, Joshua from Ephraim and Caleb from Judah, insisted they could take the land with God's help. But the people didn't listen. Numbers 14:1-2 describes the reaction. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness." They even talked about choosing a new leader and returning to Egypt. Moses and Aaron fell face down before the assembly. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes in grief and begged the people to trust God. But the congregation talked about stoning them. Then God intervened. His glory appeared at the tent of meeting, and he spoke to Moses. Numbers 14:26-35 contains his judgment. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun." As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. So the tribes wandered. For 38 more years, they circled in the wilderness. The entire generation that came out of Egypt, everyone 20 years old or older when they left, would die before Israel could enter the promised land. Only their children would inherit it. During those years, there were more rebellions. Korah, a Levite, led a revolt against Moses' leadership, and the earth swallowed him and his followers. The people grumbled about water and food repeatedly. Even Moses himself lost his temper and struck the rock instead of speaking to it as God commanded, which cost him the right to enter the promised land. Numbers 26:63-65 marks the end of this period. These are the ones counted by Moses and Eleazar the priest, when they counted the Israelites on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Not one of them was among those counted by Moses and Aaron the priest when they counted the Israelites in the desert of Sinai. For the Lord had told those Israelites they would surely die in the wilderness, and not one of them was left except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. A whole generation dead. The wilderness had purified the tribes, burning away the slave mentality and raising up a new generation born in freedom, ready to fight for their inheritance. God commanded 2 census counts during the wilderness years, one at the beginning near Sinai and one at the end on the plains of Moab. These weren't just population surveys, they were military registrations, counting every man 20 years old or older who could serve in the army. The first census happened in the 2nd year after leaving Egypt. Numbers 1.23 gives the instructions. Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to count according to their divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years old or more and able to serve in the army. The results showed the military strength of each tribe. Judah was the largest with 74,600 fighting men. Dan had 62,700, Zebulun counted 57,400, Naphtali had 53,400, Issachar fielded 54,400, Gad brought 45,650, Reuben counted 40,600, Simeon had 50,300, Ephraim had 40,500, Manasseh was the smallest with 32,200, Benjamin counted 35,400, Asher brought 41,500. Numbers 146 gives the total. All the men 20 years old or more who were able to serve in Israel's army were counted according to their families. The total number was 603,550. Over 600,000 warriors, not counting the Levites, women, children, or elderly. The nation that left Egypt was massive. Nearly 40 years later, on the plains of Moab, just before entering Canaan, God ordered another census. Same purpose, count the fighting men. But this census counted a different generation. Numbers 26:1-2 records the command. After the plague, the Lord said to Moses and Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, take a census of the whole Israelite community by families, all those 20 years old or more who are able to serve in the army of Israel. The numbers shifted. Some tribes grew, others shrank. Judah remained strong with 76,500 men, actually gaining strength. Simeon dropped dramatically from 59,300 to 22,200, the smallest tribe now. Gad had 4,500. Ephraim had 30,500. Manasseh nearly doubled to 52,700. Benjamin grew to 45,600. Dan decreased slightly to 60,400. Asher rose to 53,400. Issachar held at 60,300. Zebulun dropped to 60,500. Naphtali decreased to 45,400. Reuben fell to 43,730. Numbers 26.51 totals the second census. The total number of the men of Israel was 601,730. Remarkably similar to the first census, just 120 fewer warriors. Despite 40 years of death in the wilderness, the tribes maintained their strength. The children replaced their parents in number, ready to take what the previous generation had refused. The census also confirmed that only Joshua and Caleb remained from the old generation. Every other fighting man over 60 years old was new, part of the wilderness generation that had grown up free, trained in hardship, and prepared for conquest. Moses knew he was dying. God had shown him the promised land from Mount Nebo, but he wouldn't enter it. Before his death, he gathered the tribes one last time to bless them, just as Jacob had done centuries before. But Moses' blessings were different. They focused less on judgment and more on the spiritual gifts and future roles of each tribe. Deuteronomy 33:1 introduces the moment. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. He started with Reuben, the troubled firstborn. Deuteronomy 33:6 is brief but merciful. Let Reuben live and not die, nor his people be few. After Jacob's harsh words about Reuben's sin, Moses simply asked that the tribe survive and not disappear. Moses blessed Judah with military success. Deuteronomy 33:7 declares, "And this he said about Judah, Hear, Lord, the cry of Judah, bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes." For Levi, Moses gave the longest and most detailed blessing, honoring their faithfulness during the golden calf incident. Deuteronomy 33:8-11 pours out blessing. About Levi, he said, "Your Thummim and Urim belong to your faithful servant. You tested him at Massah, you contended with him at the waters of Meribah. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them." He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Bless all his skills, Lord, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Strike down those who rise against him, his foes, till they rise no more. Benjamin received a blessing of divine protection. Deuteronomy 33:12 describes it. About Benjamin he said, "Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders." Joseph's blessing, covering both Ephraim and Manasseh, was rich and abundant. Deuteronomy 33:13-17 declares, about Joseph he said, "May the Lord bless his land with the precious dew from heaven above, and with the deep waters that lie below. With the best the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield. With the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains, and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills. With the best gifts of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the burning bush." Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty he is like a firstborn bull, his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim, such are the thousands of Manasseh. Zebulun and Issachar were blessed together. Deuteronomy 33:18-19 says, about Zebulun he said, "Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer the sacrifices of the righteous. They will feast on the abundance of the seas, on the treasures hidden in the sand." Gad received a blessing of strength and territory. Deuteronomy 33:20-21 declares, about Gad he said, "Blessed is he who enlarges Gad's domain. Gad lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. He chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him." When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. Dan was blessed with strength like a lion. Deuteronomy 33:22 says simply, about Dan he said, "Dan is a lion's cub, springing out of Bashan." Naphtali received favor and blessing. Deuteronomy 33:23 declares, about Naphtali he said, "Naphtali is abounding with the favor of the Lord, and is full of his blessing. He will inherit southward to the lake." Asher's blessing promised strength and security. Deuteronomy 33:24-25 states, about Asher, he said, "Most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil." The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. Moses ended with a declaration of God's uniqueness and Israel's blessed position. Deuteronomy 33:26-29 concludes, "There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides across the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you, saying, 'Destroy them,' so Israel will live in safety. Jacob will dwell secure in a land of grain and new wine where the heavens drop dew. Blessed are you, Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? He is your shield and helper, and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will tread on their heights." After this, Moses climbed Mount Nebo and died. The tribes were ready. Blessed, organized, and prepared to enter the land their fathers had refused, Joshua stood at the edge of the Jordan River with the entire nation behind him. Moses was dead, and now the weight of leadership rested on his shoulders. God spoke to him directly, and Joshua 1:2-3 contains the command, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites." "I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses." The 12 tribes prepared for war. This wouldn't be a scattered effort with each tribe fighting alone. They would conquer together as one united army. Joshua sent spies to scout Jericho, the first target. When they returned safely with good news, he gave the order to cross. The Jordan was at flood stage, but God stopped the water. Joshua 3:14-17 describes the miracle. "So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam, in the vicinity of Zaretan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. All 12 tribes crossed into Canaan. They camped at Gilgal, and there they circumcised all the males born in the wilderness and celebrated Passover. The manna stopped. Now they would eat the produce of the promised land. Jericho stood before them, massive walls, locked gates, a fortified city that seemed impossible to conquer. But God had a plan. For 6 days, the army marched around the city once each day in complete silence, with priests carrying the ark. On the 7th day, they circled 7 times. Joshua 6:16 records the moment. The 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout! For the Lord has given you the city." The walls collapsed, and the tribes took Jericho. After a setback at Ai due to one man's sin, the conquest continued with renewed obedience. The tribes fought together against coalition after coalition of Canaanite kings. Joshua 10:40-42 summarizes the southern campaign. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills and the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua subdued them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and from the whole region of Goshen to Gibeon. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. The northern campaign followed. Kings formed an alliance with armies as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and horses and chariots in great number. But Joshua 11:7-8 shows the result. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth-Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua 11:23 marks the completion of the conquest phase. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. The tribes had fought together and won together. Now it was time to divide what they had conquered. Before Moses died, 2.5 tribes had made an unusual request. They wanted their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan River, not in Canaan proper. The land of Jazer and Gilead was perfect for livestock, and Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh had large herds. Numbers 32:1-5 records their petition. The Reubenites and Gadites, who had very large herds and flocks, saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were suitable for livestock. So they came to Moses and Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the community, and said, Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Eleale, Sebam, Nebo, and Beon, the land the Lord subdued before the people of Israel, are suitable for livestock, and your servants have livestock. If we have found favor in your eyes, they said, let this land be given to your servants as our possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. Moses was furious. It sounded like they wanted to abandon their brothers and avoid the fight for Canaan. But the tribes quickly clarified. Numbers 32:16-19 explains their commitment. Then they came up to him and said, We would like to build pens here for our livestock and cities, for our women and children. But we will arm ourselves for battle and go ahead of the Israelites until we have brought them to their place. Meanwhile, our women and children will live in fortified cities for protection from the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the Israelites has received their inheritance. We will not receive any inheritance with them on the other side of the Jordan, because our inheritance has come to us on the east side of the Jordan. Moses agreed. They could have the eastern territory, but their fighting men had to cross the Jordan and fight alongside their brothers until all the land was conquered. Only then could they return home. Numbers 32:33 confirms the allocation. Then Moses gave to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the whole land with its cities and the territory around them. The eastern tribes kept their word. Their warriors crossed the Jordan and fought through the entire conquest. Joshua 22:1-4 marks when they were finally released. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh and said to them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you." Now that the Lord your God has given them rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. They returned home with a blessing and a warning to remain faithful to God. When they reached the Jordan, they built a large altar there. The western tribes heard about it and immediately prepared for war, thinking the eastern tribes had built an altar for idol worship. But Joshua 22:21-29 records their explanation. It was a witness altar, a memorial to remind future generations that they too were part of Israel, even though they lived on the other side of the river. The crisis was resolved peacefully. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh lived in the territories of the conquered kings Sihon and Og, from Arnon to Mount Hermon. They were the first to receive their inheritance, and they were geographically separated from their brothers by the Jordan River. With the land conquered, Joshua gathered the tribes at Shiloh to divide the inheritance. The tabernacle was set up there, making it the nation's worship center. Joshua 18:1-2 describes the moment. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. Judah and the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, had already received their portions, but 7 tribes remained. Joshua challenged them in Joshua 18:3. "How long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you?" He sent surveyors to map out the remaining land and divide it into 7 parts. They cast lots before the Lord, and each tribe received its portion according to God's will. Judah received the largest territory in the south. Joshua 15:1 marks its extent. The allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. This included the hill country, the Negev desert, the lowlands toward the Mediterranean, and eventually Jerusalem, though the Jebusites still held that city at this time. Key cities in Judah's territory included Hebron, Bethlehem, and Debir. Simeon's inheritance was unusual. Joshua 19:1 explains, "The second lot came out for the tribe of Simeon, according to its clans. Their inheritance lay within the territory of Judah." Simeon received cities scattered throughout Judah's southern region because Judah's portion was too large. This fulfilled Jacob's prophecy that Simeon would be scattered in Israel. Benjamin received the smallest but most strategic territory. Joshua 18:11 describes it. The lot came up for the tribe of Benjamin according to its clans. Their allotted territory lay between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. This included Jericho, Bethel, and later Jerusalem would sit on the border between Benjamin and Judah. Though small, Benjamin's land connected the northern and southern tribes. Ephraim took the central hill country. Joshua 16:5 marks its borders. This was the territory of Ephraim, according to its clans. The boundary of their inheritance went from Ataroth Adar in the east to Upper Beth Horon. Important cities included Shiloh and later Samaria. Manasseh's western half received territory north of Ephraim. Joshua 17:7 defines part of its boundary. The territory of Manasseh extended from Asher to Mikmethath, east of Shechem. The boundary ran southward from there to include the people living at En Tappuah. Manasseh's daughters also received an inheritance because their father Zelophehad had died with no sons. Zebulun received land in the lower Galilee region. Joshua 19:10-11 describes it. The third lot came up for Zebulun according to its clans. The boundary of their inheritance went as far as Sarid. Going west, it ran to Maralah, touched Dabbesheth, and extended to the ravine near Jokneam. Issachar settled in the Jezreel Valley, one of the most fertile areas. Joshua 19:17-18 locates it. The fourth lot came out for Issachar according to its clans. Their territory included Jezreel, Kesuloth, Shunem. Asher received the coastal region to the north. Joshua 19:24-25 places them. The fifth lot came out for the tribe of Asher according to its clans. Their territory included Helkath, Hali, Beton, Akshaph. Naphtali took the northern territory near the Sea of Galilee. Joshua 19:32-34 marks it. The sixth lot came out for Naphtali according to its clans. Their boundary went from Heleph and the large tree in Zaanannim, passing Adami Nekeb and Jabneel to Lakum and ending at the Jordan. Dan initially received territory in the coastal lowlands west of Benjamin. Joshua 19:40-41 describes it. The seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan, according to its clans. The territory of their inheritance included Zorah, Eshtaol, Ir-Shemesh. Within these tribal territories, 48 cities were designated for the Levites, cities scattered throughout all the tribes where the Levites could live and carry out their teaching and priestly duties. Additionally, 6 cities of refuge were established, 3 on each side of the Jordan, where someone who accidentally killed another person could flee for safety. Each tribe now had its own land, its own inheritance, its own home. The promise to Abraham had been fulfilled. Each tribe developed a distinct identity, often symbolized by an animal or image that reflected its character and destiny. These symbols came primarily from the blessings Jacob and Moses pronounced over them, and they appeared on tribal banners and standards. Judah's symbol was the lion. Jacob had called Judah a lion's cub and declared the scepter would not depart from him. The lion represented kingship, strength, courage, and royal authority. Judah would produce Israel's kings and eventually the Messiah himself. When the tribes camped in the wilderness, Judah's banner bore the image of a lion, and this symbol became synonymous with leadership and power. Dan's symbol was the serpent. Jacob had prophesied that Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. This represented Dan's cunning and ability to strike unexpectedly. Despite being a smaller tribe, Dan had the capacity to bring down larger enemies through strategy rather than brute force. Benjamin's symbol was the wolf. Jacob declared, "Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder." This spoke of Benjamin's fierce warrior nature. Though the smallest tribe territorially, Benjamin produced some of Israel's fiercest fighters and would later give Israel its first king, Saul. Issachar was represented by a donkey. Jacob had said, "Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens." This wasn't an insult. It spoke of strength, endurance, and the willingness to bear burdens. Issachar understood seasons and times, providing wise counsel to Israel. Zebulun's symbol connected to ships and the sea. Jacob prophesied that Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. Though not directly on the coast, Zebulun's territory had access to trade routes in the Mediterranean, making commerce part of their identity. Naphtali was represented by a deer or doe. Moses had blessed Naphtali as a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns, speaking of grace, swiftness, and beauty. This tribe would be known for its speed in battle and eloquent speech. Gad's symbol reflected the warrior. Moses blessed Gad as one who lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. Gad would constantly face raids from the east, but would fight back fiercely, defending their territory with lion-like ferocity. Joseph's tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, shared the symbol of the ox or bull. Moses described Joseph as having the majesty of a firstborn bull with horns of a wild ox. This represented strength, fruitfulness, and the ability to push back enemies. The ox also symbolized agricultural abundance, fitting for tribes that received some of the most fertile land. Asher's symbol related to olive trees and oil. Moses said Asher would bathe his feet in oil, representing prosperity, blessing, and the production of valuable goods. Asher's territory would be rich in resources. Reuben, despite losing his birthright, maintained the symbol of a man or a flowing stream. The name Reuben means sea, a sun, and Jacob's prophecy described him as turbulent as the waters. The tribe would be unstable, but would survive. Simeon and Levi shared a connection to the sword due to their violent actions at Shechem. Jacob cursed their anger and said he would scatter them. While Levi was redeemed through priestly service, Simeon's scattering into Judah's territory fulfilled this word. Neither tribe had a strong unified symbol reflecting their dispersed nature. These symbols weren't just decorative. They shaped each tribe's self-understanding, appeared on their battle standards, and reminded them of their unique calling within the nation of Israel. Dan's story is unique among the tribes. They received their inheritance in the coastal lowlands, but they couldn't hold it. The Philistines and Amorites were too strong in that region, and Dan found themselves squeezed into the hill country, unable to claim their full territory. Judges 1:34 describes the problem. The Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. Dan was failing where other tribes had succeeded. Their territory was small to begin with, and now they couldn't even secure what they'd been given. So the tribe made a radical decision. They would find new land elsewhere. Judges 18:1 sets the stage. In those days, Israel had no king. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own, where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. They sent 5 warriors from Zorah and Eshtaol to scout for a better location. The spies traveled far north to a region near Mount Hermon and found a city called Laish. Judges 18:7-10 records what they discovered. So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. When they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their fellow Danites asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them." "We have seen the land, and it is very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever." 600 armed Danites set out with their families and possessions. On the way, they stopped at Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah had his own private shrine with idols and a hired Levite as his personal priest. The Danites stole Micah's idols and convinced the Levite to come with them as their tribal priest. Judges 18:27-29 describes the conquest. Then they took what Micah had made and his priest and went on to Laish against a people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob. The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. Dan established their new city in the far north of Israel, at the base of Mount Hermon, near one of the sources of the Jordan River. This became one of the northernmost points of Israel, giving rise to the phrase "from Dan to Beersheba" to describe the entire nation from north to south. But Dan's migration came with a spiritual cost. Judges 18:30-31 reveals the problem. There the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made, all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. Dan established idol worship in their new city, maintaining it for generations. Later, when Israel split into 2 kingdoms, Dan would become one of the 2 locations where King Jeroboam placed golden calves to keep the northern tribes from going to Jerusalem. Dan's name would become associated with idolatry and false worship, a tragic departure from their calling. The tribe that couldn't hold their coastal inheritance became the tribe that fled north and fell into spiritual compromise. After Joshua died, there was no central leader. Each tribe lived in its own territory, managing its own affairs. This was supposed to be a time when God ruled directly over his people, a theocracy. But Judges 17:6 summarizes what actually happened. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. The pattern repeated over and over. Israel would worship God, then fall into idolatry, then face oppression from enemies, then cry out to God. Then God would raise up a judge to deliver them. Then peace would last until the judge died, and the cycle would start again. The judges came from different tribes and usually delivered only part of the nation, not all of it. Othniel, the first judge, came from Judah. Judges 3:9-10 describes his calling. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. Ehud came from Benjamin. He delivered Israel from Moabite oppression through a daring assassination. Judges 3:15 introduces him. Again the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. Deborah was a prophetess from Ephraim who judged Israel. She called Barak from Naphtali to lead the army against Canaanite oppression. Judges 4:4-6 shows her leadership. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali. Gideon came from Manasseh. God called him to deliver Israel from Midianite raids. Judges 6:11-12 records the angel's appearance. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." With only 300 men from various tribes, Gideon routed the massive Midianite army. Jephthah came from Gilead, representing the eastern tribes. He was an outcast who became a deliverer. Judges 11:1 introduces him. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. He defeated the Ammonites but made a tragic vow that cost him his daughter. Samson came from Dan. He was set apart as a Nazirite from birth and given supernatural strength. Judges 13:24-25 describes his early years. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahaneh Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Samson fought the Philistines single-handedly for 20 years, though his weakness for women eventually led to his capture and death. The darkest stories came during this period. A Levite's concubine was raped and murdered in Benjamin's territory. When the other tribes demanded justice, Benjamin refused to hand over the guilty men. This sparked a civil war. Judges 20:12-13 shows the demand. The tribes of Israel sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime that was committed among you? Now turn those wicked men of Gibeah over to us, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. The 11 tribes attacked Benjamin. Judges 20:46-48 describes the devastating result. On that day 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 men turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across they set on fire. Benjamin was almost wiped out as a tribe. The other tribes regretted their oath not to give their daughters to Benjamin in marriage. Judges 21:3 captures their grief. "Lord God of Israel," they cried, "why has this happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today?" They found creative solutions to provide wives for the surviving 600 Benjamite men, preserving the tribe from extinction. This was the Judges era, tribal independence without unity, repeated apostasy without lasting repentance, and deliverance followed by decline. Samuel was the last judge and the first prophet to lead all of Israel. He was born to Hannah, a barren woman who prayed desperately for a son and promised to dedicate him to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1:27-28 records her fulfillment of that vow. "I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord." For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. Samuel grew up serving in the tabernacle under Eli the priest. God called him as a boy, and he became a prophet whose word was trusted throughout Israel. Unlike the judges before him, who delivered Israel from military threats, Samuel provided spiritual leadership. He traveled in a circuit between Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, judging Israel and calling the people back to God. Under Samuel's leadership, Israel defeated the Philistines and experienced peace. But when Samuel grew old, the people looked at the surrounding nations and wanted what they had. 1 Samuel 8:4-5 captures the moment everything changed. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Samuel was displeased. He prayed, and God responded with a sobering truth. 1 Samuel 8:7-9 contains God's answer, "And the Lord told him, 'Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you.'" Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Samuel warned them, a king would take their sons for his army, their daughters for his service, their fields and vineyards for himself, and 1/10 of everything they owned. But the people refused to listen. 1 Samuel 8:19-20 shows their determination. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us." "Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." God told Samuel to give them what they wanted. The age of judges was ending. The age of kings was beginning. God chose a man from the tribe of Benjamin to be Israel's first king. His name was Saul, and he was impressive physically, taller than anyone else, from a respected family. But Benjamin was the smallest tribe, and choosing a king from them rather than from Judah was unexpected. Samuel anointed Saul privately, then called all the tribes together at Mizpah to reveal God's choice publicly. 1 Samuel 10:20-24 describes the moment. When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul son of Kish was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies." They ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Saul started well. When the Ammonites threatened to gouge out the right eye of every man in Jabesh-Gilead, Saul rallied all Israel to rescue them. 1 Samuel 11:6-7 shows his leadership. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel." Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out together as one. The tribes united under Saul, and he won great victories against Israel's enemies: Ammonites, Philistines, Moabites, Edomites, and Amalekites. But Saul had a fatal flaw. He didn't obey God completely. When commanded to destroy the Amalekites entirely, he spared their king and the best livestock. When confronted by Samuel, Saul made excuses. 1 Samuel 15:22-23 contains Samuel's devastating response. But Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry." Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. God sent Samuel to anoint a new king, David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem in Judah. From that moment, the Spirit of the Lord left Saul, and a tormenting spirit came upon him. David was brought to play music to soothe Saul's troubled mind, and he became a favorite in the king's court. But when David killed Goliath, the Philistine champion, and the women sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands," jealousy consumed Saul. 1 Samuel 18:8-9 shows his reaction. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Saul spent years hunting David, trying to kill the man who would replace him. This created tribal tensions. Saul was from Benjamin, David from Judah. Saul's paranoia and pursuit of David divided loyalties throughout Israel. Some supported the current king, others secretly supported the future one. Saul's reign ended in tragedy. The Philistines defeated Israel at Mount Gilboa. 1 Samuel 31:3-6 describes his death. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. Benjamin's time in power was over. Judah's time was beginning. After Saul's death, the tribe of Judah immediately crowned David as their king in Hebron. But the other tribes weren't ready to accept him. 2 Samuel 2:8-10 describes the division. Meanwhile, Abner son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth son of Saul was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. For 7 years there were 2 kingdoms, David ruling Judah from Hebron, and Ishbosheth ruling the northern tribes from Mahanaim. War continued between them until Ishbosheth was murdered by his own men. The northern tribes finally came to David. 2 Samuel 5:1-3 records their submission. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. Now all 12 tribes were united under one king from Judah. David's first move was strategic. He captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites. This city sat on the border between Benjamin and Judah, making it neutral ground. By establishing his capital there, David created a royal city that didn't favor any single tribe's territory. 2 Samuel 5:6-7 describes the conquest. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, making it not just the political capital, but the religious center. He organized the tribes into a proper nation with a standing army, administrative districts, and a unified government. First Chronicles 27 lists his organization. 12 commanders, each leading a division of 24,000 men, serving 1 month each year. Every tribe contributed to the national defense. David expanded Israel's borders through military conquest. He defeated the Philistines, Moabites, Edomites, Ammonites, and Arameans. 2 Samuel 8:14-15 summarizes his reign. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. When David died, his son Solomon inherited a united, powerful kingdom. Solomon's reign brought unprecedented wealth and peace. He built the temple in Jerusalem that David had planned, creating a magnificent worship center that drew all the tribes together. 1 Kings 4:20-21 describes the prosperity. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. Solomon organized the kingdom into 12 administrative districts, each responsible for providing food for the king's household 1 month per year. But these districts deliberately cut across traditional tribal boundaries, weakening tribal identity in favor of royal control. This would create resentment. The tribes were united, Jerusalem was glorious, the temple stood magnificent, and Israel was at the height of its power. But the seeds of division were already being planted. Solomon's glory came at a cost. He conscripted laborers from the tribes, imposed heavy taxes, and married foreign wives who turned his heart toward their gods. When he died, his son Rehoboam inherited not just a kingdom, but a growing discontent, especially in the northern tribes. The people sent Jeroboam, an Ephraimite who had fled to Egypt, to speak for them. 1 Kings 12:3-4 records their petition. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam consulted his father's advisers, who urged him to lighten the burden and win the people's loyalty. But he rejected their counsel and listened instead to his young friends. 1 Kings 12:13-14 shows his disastrous response. The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." The northern tribes rebelled immediately. 1 Kings 12:16 captures their declaration. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel! Look after your own house, David." So the Israelites went home. 10 tribes broke away and made Jeroboam their king. Only Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to Rehoboam. The tribe of Simeon, whose cities were within Judah's territory, stayed with the south. The Levites gradually migrated south because Jeroboam established rival worship centers and wouldn't let them serve at the Jerusalem temple. The northern kingdom was called Israel, or Ephraim, after its dominant tribe. It consisted of Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, Ephraim, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan, plus the eastern half of Manasseh. The southern kingdom was called Judah and included Judah, Benjamin, and Simeon. Jeroboam's first concern was religious. He knew that if his people kept going to Jerusalem to worship, they might turn back to Rehoboam, so he created an alternative. 1 Kings 12:28-30 describes his solution. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. He placed golden calves at Dan in the far north and Bethel in the south, convenient locations so his people wouldn't need to travel to Jerusalem. He appointed priests from tribes other than Levi, established his own feast days, and created an entirely separate religious system. The division was complete, politically, geographically, and spiritually. The 12 tribes were now two nations, often at war with each other, following different kings and worshipping at different centers. Jacob's family had split apart. The northern kingdom of Israel lasted about 200 years. It had 19 kings from multiple dynasties, but not one of them followed the Lord. Every king continued the idol worship Jeroboam had established. God sent prophets like Elijah, Elisha, Hosea, and Amos to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. In 722 BC, judgment came. The Assyrian Empire, the most brutal military machine of its time, conquered the northern kingdom. 2 Kings 17:5-6 describes the fall. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, in Gozan on the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. The Assyrians had a policy of scattering conquered peoples to prevent rebellion. They took the 10 tribes and dispersed them throughout their empire. Then they brought foreigners into Israel's land to replace them. 2 Kings 17:24 explains, "The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites." They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. The 10 northern tribes became known as the Lost Tribes of Israel. They were scattered across the Assyrian Empire and gradually lost their distinct identity. Some undoubtedly fled south to Judah before the conquest. Others maintained their identity in exile, though they never returned as organized tribes. The foreigners who settled in their land mixed with the remaining Israelites, creating the Samaritan people. So 2 Kings 17:18-20 gives the reason for this disaster. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left, and even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. They followed the practices Israel had introduced. Therefore the Lord rejected all the people of Israel. He afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers until he thrust them from his presence. The southern kingdom of Judah watched this happen, but didn't learn the lesson. They too fell into idolatry, though they had periods of reform under godly kings like Hezekiah and Josiah. God sent prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Micah to warn them, but they rejected the message. In 586 BC, Babylon conquered Judah. King Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem for over a year. 2 Kings 25:8-11 describes the destruction. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace, and those who had deserted to the king of Babylon. Unlike the northern tribes, Judah maintained their identity in exile. They preserved their genealogies, their scriptures, and their worship practices. Prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel ministered among them in Babylon. They knew exactly who they were, the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites serving among them. The exile lasted 70 years, just as the prophet Jeremiah had predicted. Both kingdoms had fallen, all 12 tribes had been removed from the land, but God's promise to preserve them would not fail. When the Persian Empire conquered Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return home and rebuild their temple. Ezra 1:2-3 contains his proclamation. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says: "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them." About 50,000 returned under Zerubbabel's leadership. Ezra 2:64-65 gives the count. The whole company numbered 40,360, besides their 7,137 male and female slaves, and they also had 200 male and female singers. They came primarily from Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites, but the decree was open to all tribes. The returnees maintained careful genealogical records. Ezra 2 lists them by family and tribe, showing they knew exactly which tribe they belonged to. They rebuilt the temple, then later, under Nehemiah, rebuilt Jerusalem's walls. The tribal identity persisted even though the tribes no longer lived in their original territories. By the time of Jesus, tribal identity still mattered. Luke 2:36 mentions Anna of the tribe of Asher. Paul identified himself in Philippians 3:5 as of the tribe of Benjamin. The 12 apostles represented the 12 tribes, symbolizing the restoration of all Israel. Jesus promised his disciples in Matthew 19:28, "Truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." James addressed his letter in James 1:1 to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, showing the early church understood itself as the continuation of Israel's story, with believers from all tribes. The book of Revelation shows God's faithfulness to all 12 tribes extends into eternity. Revelation 7:4-8 describes 144,000 sealed from every tribe, 12,000 from each of Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Not one tribe is forgotten. The New Jerusalem has 12 gates, each named for one of the 12 tribes. Revelation 21:12 describes it. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. The foundation has 12 stones with the names of the 12 apostles, uniting Old and New Covenant peoples. From Jacob's 12 sons in Egypt to the 12 gates of the eternal city, God's purposes for each tribe endured through slavery, conquest, division, exile, and dispersion. The story of the 12 tribes proves that God's promises cannot be broken and his chosen people cannot be lost. If this journey through biblical history has impacted you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you won't miss our next deep dive into Scripture. Share this video with someone who loves biblical stories or wants to understand the bigger picture of God's plan. And let us know in the comments, which tribe's story surprised you most? The 12 tribes' legacy lives on, and their story reminds us that we too are part of God's eternal plan. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.